So I'm going to talk today about two cemeteries in North Florida that are specifically Jewish. Ethnic or religious cemeteries tend to present a little bit more of an issue with regard to recording than some of your sort of general public cemeteries. Jewish cemeteries in particular, because there's a huge language barrier that goes along with some of the recording of data. And there's a lot of sort of cultural competency that goes along with Jewish iconography, Jewish tradition, Jewish practice, the whole bit. So to that end, we did a brief case study of both of these to compare sort of some of the data that can be pulled off of looking at religious or ethnic specific cemeteries. And although ethnic or racially specific cemeteries get done often, Jews tend to get overlooked when talking about a lot of diaspora populations, since, at least in Florida and the southern part of the state, that population is pretty ubiquitous. The two cemeteries in question that we're going to talk about today are First Congregation Sons of Israel in St. Augustine, which is on the corner of Evergreen and Whitney, which is nowhere near their synagogue, which is on Cordova. And the second is Congregation Bene Israel Cemetery in Gainesville. And for those of you who've been to Gainesville, it's on the corner of University and Waldo, which is a pretty big intersection. We drove by it this morning on the way out of town. Pulled over by the police in front of it. Not important. Interestingly, Sons of Israel is named Sons of Israel. Congregation Bene Israel actually means Sons of Israel. So the reason we're talking about the Sons of Israel in North Florida is they're all the Sons of Israel. From a preservation perspective, Jewish cemeteries, like most Jewish archaeology, doesn't have a huge history. At least from a preservation perspective, there's been cemetery stewardship efforts like the things that are going on in the programs that we're talking about today. But on a large scale, you don't see a ton, except for the Charlestown Jewish Cemetery in Charlestown, Needles, which I've been working on and off with Ed Gonzalez, tenant from UCF. So to sort of frame what can be done in terms of stewardship, I want to talk about this first before we jump in. So as a result of a happenstance visit on a cruise ship in 1957, a rabbi from the American Jewish Archives stumbles on this long-forgotten cemetery from the 1500s, 1600s. Charlestown Nevis has no Jews anymore. The island of Nevis is 12,000 people. None of them are Jewish anymore. They all left. And so there's this spot on the landscape that, as you can see in 57 and 63, is pretty well overgrown. He writes an article for the American Jewish Archives Journal that says, hey, we found this thing, I recorded some stuff on it, I found 17 stones, or markers, here's what they say, we should do more with this. People read that, he writes an article for the Jewish Chronicle in London, and people really like it, and he gets a lot of local and global support for the stewardship and commemoration of one of the earliest Jewish communities, and in fact the most prominent during sort of this plantation era. He goes back in 71, and along with the state government and some local builders and some philanthropists from Philadelphia, they fixed the cemetery and put up a fence and a wall, a retaining wall, and a gate and a commemoration plaque, and it is now a heritage trail for the country of St. Kitts and Nevis. So and like I said, this is all happening without a single Jewish individual living on the island of Nevis. So somehow the world got behind this and said, this is important enough both for the local community and for the global Jewish community for stewardship and preservation. So knowing that, that's kind of the framework with how we want to approach the stewardship of Jewish landscapes. A lot of them are community driven, so they have a synagogue, a community that goes with them. That's the case with both Sons of Israel cemeteries here in North Florida. But the broader Jewish community likes to see their landscape commemorated. So getting that population involved may be a way to sort of get more activity in the CRPT program in HMS. So we wanted to show what sort of challenges and data that you can pull out of a religious, specifically Jewish, context. So the first thing to note is we're in the oldest city in the US. It exists as a result of global expansion. The Jews were not really involved in that in a positive way. They get expelled from pretty much everywhere in the world. And so even though we're principally initially a Spanish colony, and there are probably crypto or hidden Jews living in St. Augustine in the 1600s and 1700s, we don't know about them because they're cryptic. They're hidden because every country in the world kind of doesn't want us. And I say us, being Jewish myself, and as a second. So if we think about how Jews kind of migrate into Florida and get to the colonies and the Caribbean and sort of the global world that we're at, we need to talk about where they go to. So they get kicked out of Spain, they get kicked out of Portugal, the Dutch say, do whatever you want, so they go to the Dutch colonies. Like this is in Recife, Brazil, which was controlled by the Dutch. They get kicked out again when the Portuguese take over. And finally the British come to their senses and say, we'll naturalize everybody if you pledge allegiance to the crown. So Florida, being Spanish, doesn't actually officially end the policy of expulsion until like 1992 formally. So until they finally provide reparations and the Spanish and Portuguese governments say, anyone that ever was Jewish who might have been Spanish or Iberian, you can have citizenry, even today. So we don't really have a timeline for Jewish Florida until you really get to the 1800s, when Florida sort of becomes a U.S. territory, and you have people like Moses Levy and David Levy-Yulee, who becomes the first senator of the state. Moses Levy, his father, actually becomes a citizen in St. Augustine and lived here for a time in the 1820s, but it doesn't really do any good for the Jewish landscape because he's the only one who kind of does his own thing up in Gainesville, where he creates a utopian colony. So, and that's the book on him and his son. There is no good picture of Moses Levy. So the story of the cemeteries that we're talking about today really began in 1840 here in St. Augustine with the grave of Gershom Poznański, who died in 1840. The cemetery on Whitney and Evergreen is where it is as a result of Gershom Poznański dying and being buried in that open yard. His stone is all in Hebrew, so unless you read Hebrew, this means absolutely nothing. But what it actually says is, here rests Gershom ben Yosef, or Gershom the son of Joseph, who was killed by the Indians in 5601. The Jews use it on a calendar, and so 5601 roughly equates to about 1840, 1841, depending on when in the year he was killed. Later on, as a result of the spearheading of a guy named Jacob Terlinsky, you have a Jewish community that builds around Sons of Israel. They start to bury in that yard as early as 1911, and they rededicate and consecrate the yard and put up a wall because it was overgrown. So preservation efforts for cemeteries in the Jewish community were starting in St. Augustine as early as 1919. But they're still burying in the yard before any of this happens. They're holding their services in Jacob Terlinsky's house. They don't have a rabbi. The temple on Cordova doesn't get built until after this rededication in 1919. So you have a community that doesn't have an ecclesiastical structure or historic aspect of their landscape, a building that we could go to and say we need to put this on a site file and preserve it. But they do have a cemetery that is actively being used. In Gainesville, the trajectory is a little more straightforward. The first Jewish family doesn't arrive until after the Civil War. And it's really two families that sort of spearhead everything that goes on. You have the first family being the Endells, and the ones that really buy and create the cemetery where it is today, which is also not where the synagogue is in Gainesville, were the Joseph family and the Pinkerton family. And their children, Abraham, unknown, because you can't read it, Rosa, and it's also in terrible Hebrew, and Deborah, all died of yellow fever. So we can look at sort of the delineation of the population as a result of these major things in the landscape. Their populations grow, St. Augustine being much smaller. You have much fewer interments, 200 that we surveyed versus 316 or 328, is that right? 328 for Gainesville. With regard to Jewish practice, it gets a little tricky from there. Jews don't have a lot of formal rules for cemetery practice, but they do tend to err on the side of modest. And so the memorialization of headstones at all comes as a result of Jacob, from Genesis, putting a pillar, that's the word that gets used in the King James Bible, it could just be a cairn, it could be any sort of memorial next to Rachel's grave. In fact, this idea of cairns, or piles of stone, sort of gets pushed forward as well. To this day, when we talk about grave goods or memorial markers on Jewish cemeteries, we don't see the traditional things like flags or teddy bear that I think Dr. Friend mentioned, or pictures or shells or anything like that. The only thing we see are stones. This comes as a result of Jewish idea that you constantly maintain a memorial marker by placing a stone on it to continue its memorialization. Stones are not laid in the ground typically until a year after the death of the individual, because they feel like you don't need to memorialize someone within the first year because people are still thinking about it. On a practical level, it gives the earth time to settle and you have less shifting of markers once they're laid in the ground. So you have that sort of thing. Iconographically, the first thing anyone thinks of today when you say Jewish is the Star of David. Historically, that's not a Jewish symbol at all. So here's a headstone from, actually from Sons of Israel here in St. Augustine with pretty much the typical Jewish iconography, and this probably has more than most. What you're looking at is the Star of David. You're looking at the Hebrew component of it and an English component which kind of mirrors what the Hebrew says. You'll see a lot of sort of abbreviations. This is Feinun, which basically the full word Phoniquar means here lies. So you have a lot of elements that you kind of need to know what they mean in order for them to make sense. Another note that I will point out, within the Hebrew script, there are no numbers. And yet there are dates. So you have to know that symbols relate to numbers within the context of dates. However, if you don't know Hebrew, it just looks like more letters. And if you don't have a good vocabulary, you might try and look up a word that is actually a number. So if you only have Hebrew to work with, it makes inscriptions a lot more challenging, and the data that you can pull off of that a lot more challenging than for your average individual without cultural competency in Judaism or Hebrew, kind of daunting to try and deal with this ethnic population. So today we're going to focus more on the iconography than on the text. So you see more common things like the sign of the Kohanim, which is this thing, it's to live long and prosper. That's actually where Spock got it from. He's Jewish. And so it's actually the hands-laden priestly benediction. You often see that with members of the Cohen family or the priestly class. You see things like, I said, the Star of David or the menorah. And here is another acronym that basically, may his or her soul be bound up in eternal glory, is basically what that means. And you'll see that frequently on Jewish headstones. So a couple other people who have been working on Jewish headstones, Roberta Halpern and Debbie Gradwell, historian and archaeologist, kind of figured out some trends that they think are true for Jewish headstones, meaning Stars of David are related to men, menorahs potentially related to women, and some other sort of layout components. So we wanted to look at those things. So first we need to see what our populations were by size. So Gainesville was roughly 51% of the population were male, with a further 42 female and 7 whose identities we couldn't really figure out. And then here in St. Augustine, 55 male and 45 female. And again, the interments grow by age, so most of our interments are from sort of the 20s and forward, with fewer coming from that earlier period. Iconographically, there's not much. Most of what we have, in fact, like 80% of what we have in St. Augustine is Stars of David. In fact, almost nothing else aside from your everyday flowers, which for some reason are very common here in St. Augustine and not in Gainesville, something that we didn't address yet. The second most common thing that you'll see are menorahs. So the two Jewish symbols. So those are the two that we're going to deal with from here forward. So the Star of David, I said, is not a modern, it's associated with Judaism in the modern period. However, its first sort of connection to Judaism is in the Leningrad Codex from 1008. And it's not called the Star of David, it just happens to have a hexagram on the cover of this codex. It's not until the later 20th century, or late 19th, early 20th century, where the Star of David gets associated with the First Zionist Congress, the group of individuals in Europe who are trying to find a new homeland for the Jews. They settle on Zion or Palestine or the Holy Land, and it becomes the symbol of their community. Later on in the 20th century, it takes on a more dubious connection with the Holocaust and Hitler and the Nazis, where the marking of Jews with the Star of David became common practice. And so that, along with sort of the movement for Palestine and later Israel, the Star of David gets entrenched as a symbol. And we can see that in the way that Stars of David show up in patterning. The earliest Star of David in either cemetery is in 1920. And it isn't until 1935 in Gainesville that Star of Davids begin to show up on headstones, despite the fact that one cemetery has a grave as early as 1840 and the other one's as early as 1871. So the iconography in Judaism isn't really there until the 20th century, and even then, it's just the Star of David. So here's that first instance at Sons of Israel here in St. Augustine. You can see that Star of David, and it's a shared headstone, so it's actually two different graves, two different individuals, and they share that connection. And the first instance here is from 1935. So the frequency of Stars of David, we wanted to see if it actually was related to male and female. And on the surface, archaeologist Dr. Gradwell said it's a male-dominated symbol. Well, our data doesn't show that at all. In fact, the rates of Star of David mirror almost exactly to the percentage the rates of interment for gender populations. So the rate of Stars of David on male headstones is about, or 55% of all Stars of David are on men. About 55% of that population is male. If we go to menorah, that's where gender starts to play a role. So we can contradict what's been written already on gender. Menorahs, although much less common, 7 and 9% versus the 65 and 81% of the general iconographic disposition for Star of David, menorahs show up almost exclusively on female headstones. And they don't even show up until way later. So the earliest in St. Augustine is 1940, and the earliest in Gainesville, I think, is 74. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So they're not even being employed, despite the menorah being the older of the two Jewish symbols. We can also look at sidedness, another thing that we thought on double plots. So most of the interments here are single plot, and most of them are tablet, an upright slab, or an upright stone rather. But if we look at the double stones here, these, we wanted to look at sidedness to see if there was a preference for male or female on any given side. And it doesn't appear to be that that's the case, although again, Gradwell and Halpern tried to tie it back to that. Now this is a small sample for the community here in North Florida, but I think it's indicative to say that we need to be looking at regional practices as well as those broader connections to the greater Jewish diaspora. So if we look at frequency of headstone form, like I said, single tablets are really where it's at. But you do see a diversity, and that's sort of being cut down through time. Both of these cemeteries are actively being used as burial yards. And so they have put in their bylaws that you can't do certain things anymore. So you can no longer have a curbing, you can no longer have an obelisk or some of these major things. You really only can have single and double headstones with potentially a footstone. That's all you're getting. So this early diversity is something that we're not going to see in other times. So anything that sort of falls outside normative practice for Jews is what we're going to see. Languages, as I said, most things are Hebrew and English, which means that you've got to have a little more cultural competence. And the last sort of cool thing I want to note is we started doing this survey in St. Augustine, and we realized that there was a Hebrew word written on some of the stones that didn't appear anywhere else. And the first, what that is this word right here inside these Stars of David, and it says in Hebrew, Zion, which relates to Israel or the Holy Land. And it only starts, the first occurrence is in 1918, and the last one is in the 60s. We can kind of throw one of those out for being a familial stone tied with other ones from the 20s, is that there is a spike of these going through in the 20s and down to the end of the 40s. And what happens is that ties directly to the first Zionist Congress in 1897. So right as the Zionist movement is beginning and the Palestinian mandate from the British government happens in 1918, you have a lot of Jews living in the diaspora, in the US, coming from Eastern Europe, who identify heavily with the idea that there will be a Jewish homeland, or a Jewish homeland very soon. And as they're dying during this movement, they're commemorating that idea with the word Zion on their headstones. It doesn't appear any time outside of that time period, and it only happens here, which means there's a group of individuals living in this community who have an ideology that ties pretty heavily with the idea of a Jewish homeland. And while you get a lot of them, there are 26 in total out of 200, so it's a little more than a tenth, not bad. And when you do get individuals commemorating their participation in the War of Independence, you don't see that same Zion link in Gainesville or really anywhere else. Simon's master's thesis in North Carolina, I think you had 2 out of like 1,000 stones.
So there are probably 300 in the Jewish cemetery I looked at, and of those 300 there were 2.
And there were 2, and they were in the same time period.
Yes.
So we have a thing that we can look at going forward is a specifically temporally bounded component that we need to do more research on. So to end, and I went over, sorry Sarah, but thank you. But the things that we really need to look at is North Florida specifically is where the Jewish historic concentration exists. Gainesville and St. Augustine are 2 of the oldest. However, Pensacola, Jacksonville, and Ocala have communities that are of the same ilk. So Avafa Chesed in Jacksonville and United Hebrews of Ocala in Ocala come from 1871 and 1888 respectively, and their cemeteries are not really doing as well as they could. Evergreen in Jacksonville is obviously huge and open to everybody, but the Temple section was in massive disrepair until 2009, so none of that data has really been dealt with in a meaningful way. So looking at ethnic populations in North Florida is a huge thing that we're hoping to do going forward, and to kind of gather momentum using the massive Jewish population in and around Florida. UF is known as JUF for its number of Jewish students, so we're hoping to tie into that connection and get them to disperse in a program that may be similar to what's going on at Indian River. So, thank you. Hopefully that was a little...